I'm at that age now where I'm using phrases like, I'm at that age now. But I look back on things that have happened through Formula 1 history that I got to see with my own eyes, and I go, oh yeah, that doesn't happen anymore, does it? Pretty much all the stuff that was around when I was a wee lad in front of my parents' telly in Lincolnshire in the mid to late 90s and then into the early 2000s, well, it's gone. Tobacco sponsorship, V10s, V8s, V12s because of the 1994 and 1995 regulations. It's all stuff that people pine for because there's that rose-tinted goggle effect of, it was much better in the day. Sound-wise? Oh yeah, definitely, it was. And those lower revving V10s are better than the 19 to 20k ones, fight me, but the racing, there wasn't the constant wheel-to-wheel battles that those highlights made it seem there was. Even the BTCC Super Touring era, watch those races in full and you'll feel shortchanged. The highlights on Grandstand make it look like the lights to flag carnage fest that you never saw on Eurosport. And I need to remake that episode of Storytime actually because it really was a unique era. But there was one other thing that happened a lot in that time too, and that was testing. If you're new to the sport, coming in with Drive to Survive and stuff like that, then the prospect of teams testing wherever and whenever the hell they wanted might seem like an alien concept. In 1971, Ferrari constructed the Fiorano test track to create a circuit that had all manner of corners on it, so Ferrari could simulate virtually any type of corner used at Grand Prix circuits across the world. Lotus also had their own test track, having a test track at their base at Hethel in Norfolk when they moved there in 1966. Much like most British tracks, it's an old airfield, and much like Ferrari, it's had its fair share of legends running on it. Clark, Hill, Rindt, Senna to name quite literally 4. And yes, there are others, you don't need to tell me who was admitted. And speaking of the 60s, there was a time that if you had the wherewithal to convince the local council or the local rozzers to sort of, help you out a little bit, teams would be doing flat out blasts up motorways or using public roads to test handling, with nothing more than Bazza and his trusty stopwatch standing at the side of the road. Online and magazine articles of Michael Schumacher turning hundreds and hundreds of laps of the Fiorano test track at Ferrari's base in Maranello, watched by die-hard tifosi who have got their faces right up against the fences, have become part of Formula 1 folklore. It's reckoned that Schumacher would turn thousands, and I mean thousands of laps of that track just to understand everything the car was doing and how to drive around any problems that the car might have had. And being the number one driver, he got the priority. And there is a rumour that Eddie Irvine didn't get to do a test in the Ferrari in 1996 until the week of the Portuguese Grand Prix of that year, all because Eddie had been faster than Michael in qualifying for the first race of the season. But I don't believe that for a second. These days, well, testing has become quite restrictive. Yeah, we'll leave it at that, restrictive. In 2025, you test when and where the FIA tells you that you can test. And it's all about cost saving, really. And the amount of testing that has been allowed to be conducted since the latter part of the first decade of the 2000s has been reduced more and more and more as time has gone on, to the point where rookies have to hit the ground running or risk being put out to pasture. Or in the case of Red Bull, taken round the back of the barn where Mr. Marco appears to be holding a shotgun. In 2003, the FIA made some concessions for the smaller teams on the grid, most notably Minardi and Jordan, who were the two teams on the edge, no pun intended with Jordan sponsors, in terms of financial ability to compete. I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again because some of you might be new given the people involved in this story, but in the 18 months prior to the start of the 2003 season, Prost, yes that Prost, and Arrows had gone bust, leaving the F1 grid with just 20 competitors. Well, I say just 20 competitors, that's what we have now, and it's about to go up to 22. But if Minardi was to go bust, F1 would be down to 18 cars. If Jordan went, 16. If Sauber was to lose its technical alliance with Ferrari or otherwise fall on its arse, then 14. And with nobody really wanting to take their places, Formula 1 could have been in a bit of an embarrassing situation. So in addition to Bernie's Fighting Fund, which was a grant system that allowed the teams to dip in for a one-time payment to help cover costs while they waited on sponsors to pay out, or a buyer, or whatever, the FIA allowed the teams to do testing during Friday practice, in exchange for a reduction of testing mileage at official FIA tests. So Jordan and Minardi didn't need to spend money hiring tracks and would get more time on track during Friday practice sessions. So it was seen as a potential win. But at this time, unlimited testing was still allowed, and drivers like Alexander Wurz, Pedro de la Rosa, Marc Genet and Luca Badoa had very long and successful careers just as test drivers. But in 2007, the days of unlimited testing were over. The FIA instigated a cap on the amount of testing miles, limiting teams to 30,000 kilometres or 18,500 miles, and if you were testing, you could only take one car with you. As an example, in pre-season testing, Alonso and Hamilton at McLaren were doing their runs by themselves on track, with Alonso completing just over 1,100 laps, with Hamilton doing around 1,000 laps, equating to 8,377 kilometres for Alonso and 7,715 kilometres for Hamilton. This being done across tests at Jerez, Valencia, Barcelona and Bahrain between January 2007 and the start of March 2007. Rookies these days would kill for that amount of testing now. In 2008, the amount of in-season testing was reduced to 15,000 kilometres and then outlawed altogether in 2009. But starting from 2014, the FIA would allow in-season testing again for rookies or developmental purposes. But hiring a track and turning laps or using your own place? Banned. Compare Hamilton's pre-season testing at McLaren with the likes of, say, Norris or Magnussen, who came a bit later on. A massive difference. These days, rookies get 3 days, and that's it, and they might not even do the whole of those 3 days because the teams will split the sort of test runnings 50-50. Well, depends on the team, really, but we're actually going to stay on topic with Hamilton because in 2013, a test session got his team into a lot of trouble. The 2013 Mercedes had a small problem. It chewed tyres like it was going out of fashion, particularly on the rear. At the Spanish Grand Prix that year, the Mercedes cars had endured an absolutely horrid time, with Hamilton finishing 12th and a lap down after qualifying second, and Rosberg finishing 6th and almost a minute behind race winner Alonso. Mercedes had a massive problem, because those 2013 tyres weren't exactly durable. The 2013 tyres were very tricky to achieve long stints on. At Australia, Raikkonen had managed to achieve a 2-stop race, while his closest competitors had to do a 3-stop race. Following that same Grand Prix, Christian Horner had been speaking to the media and speaking about very little else but the tyres. And media outlets were writing up things about how Pirelli was trying to be very careful not to bow to the pressure and build a tyre that was for everybody, not just one team. Because it wasn't just Mercedes struggling with the high degradation at the rear, Red Bull were too. The downforce levels had come back up in the wake of the blown diffuser bans, so the cars were almost too grippy for the tyres to handle. And most people at the time said that Red Bull was just complaining because they were struggling. The criticisms weren't just from Red Bull though, it was coming from the motorsport media and the fans, saying that Formula 1 had become too reliant on saving tyres, and had become a tyre efficiency formula, much like Group C had been a fuel efficiency formula, so drivers weren't pushing to try and extend the life of the tyres. People watching and the drivers themselves wanted the tyres to be made in such a way that if a driver wanted to push, he could do so and do a guaranteed amount of laps before the so-called cliff, and those that wanted to save could save. It was definitely something that Formula 1 had to sort out. The sport was too reliant on the tyres, and while 2012 had seen the now famous 7 race winners in as many races record, 2013 hadn't had the same effect. But Pirelli did announce that they'd have some new tyres in time for the Canadian Grand Prix, which came after more Red Bull complaints. Because that Spanish Grand Prix had race winner Alonso do a 4-stop race, something that had only happened once before in Pirelli's time in F1. There had also been several delaminations, including Hamilton and Massa at Bahrain. Red Bull weren't happy about the 4-stop races, but Ferrari said, well, we had the balls to try it, why didn't you? Why did you only go for a 3-stopper? Meanwhile, Lotus, who had been pretty easy on the tyres, were incensed that the tyres could be changed. Ferrari hit back at Red Bull and Christian Horner, accusing both of having very short memories, because at the 2011 Spanish Grand Prix, Vettel had won with a 4-stop strategy. But before Pirelli could bring in these new tyres for the Canadian Grand Prix, or whenever they were going to bring them in, they had to test them. And this is where the trouble began. When in-season testing was banned and the regulations got fine-tuned over the years, the FIA said that you could run a current car for marketing purposes, because manufacturers like Renault, Ferrari, Mercedes and so on will want to do these filming runs for their marketing, for their car dealers or whatever, and energy drink manufacturers, they can use them in TV adverts and so on, as well as the sponsors getting some exposure. A McLaren with those Vodafone logos would have looked good in the Vodafone shops, for instance, or Santander Bank and Ferrari. But if the teams wanted to do some other bits and pieces, like put a potential new driver in the car to bring them up to speed in case they want to sign them or whatever, then the FIA said, you can, but you have to use a car that's at least 3 years old. Otherwise, we'd end up having all the teams doing filming days where there's 300 people there and they're all holding laptops for some reason. Pirelli had actually done a tyre test in 2013 with Ferrari. Now, the reason a fuss wasn't kicked up is because Ferrari had done the test using a 2011 car, which had been approved by the FIA for the purposes of that test. Now, it could have been mitigating circumstances, and by that I mean, okay, using a 2010 car is too far removed. We'll compromise and let you use a 2011 car for more efficient data gathering without you getting too much data that you can copy over to your current car. And that test went ahead with Ferrari and Pirelli doing whatever it was they did. Pirelli then approached Mercedes for the next test, and before doing so they went to Charlie Whiting, who said, yes, you can test, but you have to offer all of the other teams the same kind of opportunity, if you will. Pirelli had actually asked all of the other teams, would you do a test if we asked you, to which all the teams said yes. So Pirelli went, well, we've met that criteria, so, yo Ross, you want to go testing? The test was conducted over 3 days, with Hamilton and Rosberg running these new Canadian Grand Prix spec tyres while doing the test with their helmets blacked out, as to not draw too much attention. But this might have actually done more damage, because on the Saturday of the Monaco Grand Prix weekend, the day of qualifying, both Ferrari and Red Bull got wind that this super secret test had been conducted, and Christian Horner went straight to the FIA about it. And yes, I know, it's funny to meme the whole Horner going to the FIA thing, but he did have a point. Ferrari had run their test on an older car. Mercedes had run their test on a then current car, and that was in clear violation of the rules. Article 22.4 of the FIA sporting regulations to be precise. Horner was merely asking for a clarification because, yes, the rules had been broken in this aspect, but the reasoning from Pirelli was, these are tyres that are going to be used in competition. We need the most up-to-date data from the most up-to-date cars, which is also a valid point. But later on, Horner did admit to Sky Sports that Pirelli had approached the team about the same test, but they rejected it on the grounds of it being illegal. The two parties, so Mercedes and Pirelli, were hauled in front of an FIA tribunal, with Mercedes charged with breaking Article 22.4. But in their investigation, the FIA went, well, we did kind of approve this. The FIA concluded after the Canadian Grand Prix that Pirelli and Mercedes had conducted an illegal test, as per the rules, but the FIA had acted in good faith by allowing the test to take place. But even then, Charlie's good faith didn't override 22.4. There was also an investigation to figure out whether or not Mercedes gained anything from this, and this kicked off further when on the Sunday, the day after Testgate came to light, Rosberg won the Monaco Grand Prix. And that's probably why the whole thing blew up in the way that it did. Mercedes was having rear tyre issues, Mercedes does a test, and then the very next race after that test, Rosberg wins the Monaco Grand Prix, so it all seemed a little bit convenient. But the thing is, the tyres that were run in that Monaco Grand Prix weren't the tyres that Mercedes tested. They were going to be coming in for the Canadian Grand Prix instead. Well, I say that. These new tyres were only on the rears and only used in practice. So essentially, everybody was now doing the tyre test. Those rear tyres would be taken to Silverstone, which was the Grand Prix after Canada, and then be raced for the first time. It was thought that these tyres would be locked in for the rest of the season, because any further changes would have required a unanimous vote from all the teams. And I have done a full video on what happened during that 2013 British Grand Prix. Essentially, Bono, my tyres have actually gone. Hamilton and several other drivers suffered blowouts at various points of that British Grand Prix, all but one of those blowouts occurring on the left rear tyre. Part of the reason for this is that the teams were swapping tyres, something that they didn't think was causing any harm, and Pirelli didn't exactly forbid this. The thing is, tyre swapping was possible earlier in the season because the tyres were symmetric. The tyres tested in Canada that had been brought through to Silverstone were asymmetric, meaning that tyre swapping was going to cause issues. But the thing is, nobody anticipated those issues, and then tyre swapping was quickly banned. The blowouts embarrassed Formula 1 and Pirelli. In the wake of the race, Horner was once again talking about tyres, and Rosberg had managed to win the race on those new rears. So it looked like Mercedes got their advantage after all. But the thing is, these blowouts had actually taken the spotlight off that test. And now the spotlight was back on Pirelli and only Pirelli, because the main thing now was that these tyres were potentially unsafe. Even if the investigation said that it was the teams running whatever they were doing that contributed. But as it was, the Silverstone blowouts forced Pirelli's hand. They had to change the specification of the tyres and receive permission from the FIA to change the specification of the tyres. The thing is, it didn't require a vote because this was now a safety concern and not a performance concern. After the British Grand Prix, Horner was telling journalists that Formula 1 should go back to the 2012 spec of tyres for the rest of the season, because of the sheer amount of blowouts that had occurred at just one Grand Prix, as well as the blowouts that had occurred earlier in the season, as well as reiterating his calls for the tyres to be longer lasting and holding performance for longer. And there's no agenda here, there's no anti-Red Bull, anti-Horner sentiment or anything of the sort, this is just what was happening. Red Bull was saying this, and the other teams were saying, build a better car. It was all dick measuring and politics. And yes, Horner does bring a lot of press attention when things aren't going quite right for his team, but he was also pointing out how Lotus and Ferrari were against those version 1.1 tyres brought to Canada due to how it might affect their performance. All the teams were arguing this, that and the other, not just Horner. It's just that Horner's usually the loudest and he's the one in all the articles that I've found so far. At the Nürburgring, the tyres were changed again. The steel belts were changed back to Kevlar, so the operating temperature of the tyres was reduced by 10 degrees. Vettel won the German Grand Prix on a slightly revised tyre called version 1.2, and it would have been interesting to see what happened if they carried on using that spec. For the Hungarian Grand Prix, Pirelli brought the final specification of tyres, which I'll dub as version 1.3. These were 2012 construction but with 2013 compounds, and Hamilton went on to win the race, which again sounds suspicious after the whole testing thing, but these weren't the tyres that Mercedes tested. The only race that ran the tyres they tested was Silverstone, which admittedly they did win. But the other car had a catastrophic blowout which kinda negates everything. But after that came the turning point of the 2013 season. Vettel went on to win the rest of the races that year. The 2012 construction suited the Red Bull better, and a lot of their issues with rear degradation were sorted, which allowed Vettel to win 9 races in a row, taking his 4th World Championship in dominant style. Although it has to be said that after the German Grand Prix, Vettel had a decent lead in the driver's standings anyway, so it might have helped things along, but at the same time it probably changed nothing. So did Mercedes get a competitive advantage out of this test? Well, sort of, because they won the British Grand Prix. But then the tyres were immediately changed, and it was Red Bull that came out the other side on top. So while there was initial outrage for this test, in the end, it didn't seem to matter much. Mercedes won the British Grand Prix on the tyres they tested, but then won the Hungarian Grand Prix on the revised 2012 tyres that Vettel then dominated with, while the tyres that were initially taken to Canada and then run at Silverstone used for one race and one race only. So what might have happened if they used the Silverstone tyres for the rest of the season? Answers on a postcard. For 2014, in-season testing was allowed at specific races, to try and avoid a similar thing happening again, along with young driver tests being held at certain points to allow younger drivers to get some seat time since the simulators don't have the same variables as doing it for real. But for a very brief period in Formula 1 during the 2013 season, there was a lot of ire directed at a team for helping the tyre supplier out. But it looks like all that ire was for naught, because not only did Mercedes only use those tyres for one race and one race only, which admittedly they did win, there's also accusations that this helped them into 2014. But Pirelli didn't start doing the 2014 tyres until after that test, so Mercedes wouldn't have known what was going on. So it was just one of those things where it's like, yeah, we're going to make a massive fuss about it, but really, the tyre specs changed anyway, so yeah, why did we even get angry about it in the first place? But I'd like to know what you think down in the comments. So then, a look at testing gate and whether or not it was actually an advantage for Mercedes or not. If this has been a fun look through the motorsport history books, then do like the video so I know a good job was done. And for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on any future videos that I do. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help support me at a more personal level, there will be a link to Patreon down in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks for the one and done kinds of donations, and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.